That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables. Let anyone with ears listen.
And that's the story of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Nothing like getting ready to stand up to preach and spilling water on yourself. In the beginning was a story, and that story continues to unfold. It is complex, it is shared, it is good, it's not over, it's untamed, surprising, and it is ours and it is yours. It's a story of nudging, of prompting, of surprise, of revealing, of courage. It's a story of calling. It's a story of 8 who set out on a journey toward ordination. For the discerning, prayer-making, paper-writing, you surely don't mean me, God, ordinance. Tonight marks a new chapter in their story. And for those that we just commissioned, the story continues to unfold. Tonight, we catch a glimpse of the trailer or the teaser, or as my good friend Todd Rossnagel says, the sizzle reel. Or maybe we just go old school and read the foreword to this unfolding story. And while this is their story, the rest of us get to play a part in this story, because this story belongs to all of us. This is a story of healing hurts, a story of reconciliation, grace, mercy, justice, and love. It is the gospel story. It's a story of God at work in the lives of ordinary people that produce extraordinary fruit. It's the unfolding story of people who are learning each and every day new ways, better ways, more ways to love God and neighbor. In a time of uncertainty, when the world is upside down and the United Methodist Church is facing all of its challenges, God is still calling people to proclaim the good news, calling them to proclaim the good news to a world that needs to hear just a little bit of good news. And not only is God calling, even more amazing, you are listening and you're responding and you're saying yes, not just to ordination, but yes to the work of discipleship and transformation. You could say, God, not now. There's a pandemic. Or not now because, this race stuff, it's really hard. Or not now, we don't even know if there's going to be a United Methodist Church. God, not now. Can you just call somebody else? You've not said, not now. You have said, yes, now. Yes, now, for such a time as this. These are unusual times that call for courageous action. A courage that you often muster in darkness, like trying to make your way across a dark space. But then when your eyes adjust, all of a sudden you can see. This is especially a time that calls for deep, deep listening. This is why I like this passage. Yes, I love this site in the Holy Land. It's lush, and it gets a sense of this amphitheater style on the hillside where the sound will carry all the way from the sea to the top of the hill. It's where Jesus first begins to teach using stories, illustrative stories that take ordinary stuff like seeds and pearls and coins and sheep to help the people understand more fully. It's located in the place where Jesus spends most of his time. But it's what he says at the end of this passage that catches my ear, and I hope it does yours. He says, "Let anyone with ears listen." He doesn't say everyone with ears hear. He says everyone with ears listen. Eugene Peterson's The Message says, "Are you listening to this? Like really listening?" And the Common English Bible says, "Everyone who has ears should pay attention." Listening, really listening, paying attention. This is important. So as you travel the next paths of your journey, you'll need to be bearers of the good news, the stories of Jesus, but you too will need to tune your ears more than ever to listen, really listen, pay attention to the needs of the people, for that is where the stories of Jesus unfold. Now, I'm just not talking here to preacher types. Lay folk, you too are bearers of the good news of Jesus as you teach children and youth and adults and sing in the choir and usher on Sunday mornings or serve as communion stewards. You must not simply speak or sing the good news. You must be the good news. Embody it, incarnate the good news of Jesus so that you too will have ears to listen, really listen, and pay attention. I don't have to tell you that people are hurting. They're returning to our churches now, to our small groups, our Sunday school classes, and they are wounded. These are challenging times. There is illness. COVID-19 still exists, right, Dr. Twyman? Cancer, mental health challenges are at an all-time high, as is addiction. People are hungry. Children are being left at the border alone. People are being othered by well-meaning Christians. We have to be the walking around, talking, serving, good news loving listeners, attention paying followers of Jesus Christ. Now more than ever, we must listen and live in solidarity with the marginalized and draw people towards the margins by our example and deep faith and deep love. Ordinands and those we just commissioned. It is harder than ever to lead a congregation. There is almost nothing in our daily life that is as we have known it before. So please, care for yourselves. Tend to your relationships with God, with your family, and those you enter into covenant with today. Be clear about your purpose and your mission. If it's to love God and love neighbor, if it's to make disciples that transform the world, whatever it is, be clear about your purpose. The cabinet listened in on a session with Bishop Michael Curry of the Episcopal Church this week, and he too spoke about clarity of purpose and mission. And he said, throw yourself into this work. Allow the Holy Spirit to guide you and rely on the support of the covenant community. That's pretty good guidance for all of us. You know, I'd love to tell you that every day will be filled with joy, but there are days that you will feel abandoned. Abandoned by God, the congregation, the system, even your family. On those days, I say be of good courage and know that best of all, God is with you, even and especially when it doesn't feel much like it. Always remember that God is still speaking, still prodding, still listening, and you must continue to discern and listen for the movement of the Spirit. Be willing to take a stand for justice, even when it's not popular. Lead your people to know that the love of Christ is extended to all people. That people are not issues, they are people, human beings, sons, daughters, siblings, faithful followers of Jesus. They are black, they are white, they are brown, they are Asian, they are rich, they are poor, they are gay, they are straight, they are right, they are left. They are people and they matter. They matter. Their story matters. Because their story is your story, their story is our story. Let us also continue to set a table with room for all. We once had this breakfast table in our home that was about 4 feet by 4 feet. But you could pull it out and it just grew and grew and grew. We could go from a table of 4 to a table of 12, just like that. I envisioned a table with more leaves than we can count. You see, it's at table that we experience the fullness of God. The power of gathering as God's people at table, even a virtual one, is powerful. And while, yes, I think about the table as Jesus' table and the communion table, I also think about the table as families gather around table for a meal and conversation. Again, in our family, when our daughter was young, it was important for us to share a meal together, and it was usually dinner, so that we could talk about our day. Sometimes our table was in the car on the way to soccer practice, or in the parking lot of the McDonald's. But that time together as a family to break bread together invited us into conversation with one another. The table, the dinner table, the conference room table, the coffee table, the Sunday school room Costco table, the Starbucks table, is where conversation happens, where we share life, where we share work. It's where we divide and share our work. It's where we listen, really listen, and pay attention to one another's story and the movement of God. I learned this early on as a child, as my mother's table was always open and ready to feed, and not just food, but feed the soul. Feed the community around the table. There was always room for another. It's where we did our best thinking, sometimes even our worst thinking. We agreed at the table, we disagreed at the table, and sometimes we even argued at the table. But when we pushed away from that table of plenty, we remained full and deeply in love with one another. The table is, I believe, our United Methodist theology at its best. It is a table, an open table, where all of God's people can gather and share and be. It's where our collective wisdom comes together. It's where creativity happens out of conversation. New things happen. We join in concert with one another. Our United Methodist theology at its best. At the table, an open table, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary. People and places come together out of a holy and sacred space at the table. I know sometimes our tables don't always feel very holy when we disagree or we trust less than we should. But the Spirit intercedes and uses even these moments because, you see, God doesn't waste anything. I believe the table is where we can best express our love for the church and its people. And it's also the place where our deepest listening love and respect for one another ought to be so very present. The table is a place of respect as we gather to celebrate the holiness and sacredness of being together around a table, sharing our story. It's where we can turn chaos into peace. There is a lot of talk and conversation about chaos right now, and I want us to work to shift that narrative, to tell a new story. If we're really honest with one another, we're often the creators of the chaos. We hold those spoons that stir the pots. Yet, we have agency to change the outcome of our story. Can it be said that we, Louisiana United Methodists, share a deep, deep love for Christ and one another? Despite our differences, and maybe even because of our differences, we love in ways that defy all the odds. We love because Christ first loved us. This night, a night of commissioning and ordination and associate membership, is a chapter in this ever-unfolding story. God has called you for such a time as this, to sow seeds, to find lost coins, to find lost sheep, and to teach others to sow seeds and find lost coins and find lost sheep. To teach others to listen for the movement of the Spirit and to one another. Really listen. God is calling you now, all of you, to reach deep into the margins of our communities and name the racism, the sexism, and all those other isms and otherness that exists. We must be a church for all. Not a traditional church or a progressive church, not a gay church or a straight church, certainly not a white church or a black church or a brown, young, or old church. We cannot set our little individual tables, but instead set the ever-expanding table of God's unmerited grace. This is hard work, and it is sacred work, and it is work worth doing. Work worth doing, not just for the preachers and church staff, but for all of God's children. We must proclaim the gospel in every way so that those who have ears will listen. We must be listeners of the truth, the grace, and the love of God. Dear friends, this story of ours is the story of Jesus, who came to live among us and now calls us into deeper relationship with him and with one another. We do have a story to tell to the nations that has the capacity to turn hearts, a story that can bring peace to a chaotic world, a story that can turn darkness into light. That story is ours. Are you paying attention? Are you listening? Really listening? This is our story. Amen.